I know what fear is. Not the fear of thunder or the garden hose, but the silent kind of fear. The fear that tightens your throat and smells like a place that isn't yours. For us dogs, life boils down to a few smells. And the smell of abandonment, that's unmistakable. It's the scent of loneliness mixed with disinfectant and dry tears. I felt it that night. The last night I spent behind those cold bars. If you are here now, listening to me, it's because I survived that night. I conquered the fear. But before everything happened, I had to say goodbye. I had to accept a truth that hurt more than any wound. No one was coming for me. It was too late. The gate had been locked. The last car drove away carrying another dog's hope, but mine was left behind, forgotten like an old toy in the corner of the yard. I was in kennel number 7, the kennel for the lost causes, as the humans whispered. Not because we were unredeemable, but because we were too old, too scared, or, in my case, because I'd had a first owner. But that is a letter for another day. That night, it was all about me and the moon. The only window in Kennel 7 was high, almost near the ceiling, and the full moon looked like a beacon of hope hanging in the black sky. I strained myself, used what was left of my puppy energy, and managed to rest my snout on the cold edge of the concrete, looking out. You are a fool, Goldie, I thought. You sat here all day, wagging your tail for every pair of passing shoes. You groomed yourself and cleaned up to look perfect, and they looked at the younger ones, the prettier ones, the ones who knew tricks. And that's fair. I know it is. The world is full of dogs who need love. But when the last pair of shoes left and the last key turned in the metal door's lock, the truth hit me with the force of a punch to the gut. The game was over. Not today. I closed my eyes. I just wanted to be one of those dogs who sleep soundly, but the fear wouldn't let me. It stayed there, licking my fur, a cold presence. That's when I started talking to you, Moon. I didn't know your name then. I just knew you were the only bright thing in a world that had suddenly turned all gray. And I started telling you the story of my heart. A heart that, despite being golden, was starting to rust from so much loneliness and abandonment. The moon was my Goldie's letter, and the subject would always be the same. What is home, after all? I didn't want a castle. I just wanted a pair of shoes that would stop in front of me and never leave again. I looked at you, Moon, and tried to find a face there, some sign that you also felt what it was like to be alone in the middle of the vastness. In the shelter, we don't have a clock, but we know the night has a different smell, a smell of secrets and broken promises. My broken promise had a name. Home. What is home to you, Moon? For humans, it's a place full of rectangular boxes, the smell of food, and doors that close. For us dogs, it's much simpler and infinitely more complex. Home isn't a roof. Home is the rhythm of a human's sleeping breath. It's the familiar sound of the key in the door at the end of the day. It's the scent of the old t-shirt they wear, which is only theirs and makes us feel safe. I had all of that, or thought I did. I remembered my first human. He taught me to love unconditionally, but he never taught me what to do when that unconditional condition was undone. He taught me that loyalty was an unbreakable bond, but he broke ours. And you know, Moon, what hurt the most? It wasn't the pain of hunger or cold. It was the pain of memory. The memory of sunny days in the park where I ran and he laughed, and I thought, this is my universe. This is my forever. Memory turns everything inside here into a sharp ache because you realize the only thing you truly possessed was the illusion of permanence. Why do they do it, Moon? I asked you. Why do they teach us the meaning of the word love and then leave us in the hardest chapter of the story, the one about goodbye? And why is it me who has to stay here, staring at the stars while the door to the home I knew is closed forever? I wasn't angry. I was confused. I just wanted to understand the logic of human hearts, which can be so big, but sometimes choose to be so small. I know you have your own stories too, your own weights. And if you are here, it means you also have a golden heart, one that understands the emotion behind a simple bark. If this conversation with the moon is touching you, if you feel you need more doses of hope, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you help me spread the story that even the greatest loneliness can be transformed into a new beginning. Promise me you won't leave me alone here? In that moment, I made an oath to you, Moon. I swore that if I ever left that place, if I ever found that pair of shoes that stopped forever, I would never forget what I felt that night. The pain of thinking, no one will come for me. And most importantly, I swore I would teach everyone the true meaning of the word loyalty, which is to love without asking if you will be loved back. I didn't know it, Moon, but the universe was already plotting the twist. I was there, curled up, with my snout resting on the cold concrete. The moon remained my only confidant, but the shelter had that nighttime life that humans never notice. I'm not talking about the city noises, but the dog's symphony, the muffled whine of those who miss someone, the quick bark of those dreaming of hunts, the quiet cry of a puppy. All of that was my sound universe. And suddenly, in the middle of all that melancholic chaos, I heard something different, a new sound. It was a smell. Not the smell of food, not the smell of a human. It was a smell that came from far away, a smell of wet earth and forest, brought by a breeze that, surprisingly, invaded Kennel 7. And with the smell came the sound. It wasn't a bark, it was a sigh, a deep, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 nights. I stood up, my ears on high alert. The sound came from the outside yard, very close to the fence that separated the shelter from the world outside, where the darkness was densest. I moved closer to the bars, sniffing the ground. My instinct screamed, "Danger!" But my curiosity, that eternal golden flame, forced me to go beyond the fear.
I pressed my snout against the fence, trying to see in the gloom. That's when I saw it. It wasn't a dog. It was the shadow of a dog. Large, imposing, standing on the other side of the wall. It wasn't moving, just looking up at the sky, in the exact direction of the moon I was watching. It seemed to be made of pure sadness, a statue of grief. And the sigh? It came from him. It was as if the night itself was weeping through that being. He didn't see me. He was too busy in his own suffering. I could feel it. His sadness was palpable, like a heavy collar. I wanted to bark so he would know he wasn't alone, but something stopped me. It felt like that moment was sacred, a moment of private mourning, and I shouldn't interfere. For a moment, Moon, I forgot about myself. I forgot my bars. I forgot that no one was coming for me. I could only feel the pain of that shadow in the dark. For the first time that night, I realized that abandonment wasn't exclusive to me. Suffering was universal. That dog, or perhaps it was the soul of a dog, was out there, suffering his own loss under the same silver beacon. And he wasn't waiting to be rescued by anyone. He was there to say goodbye. I stood paralyzed, watching. He raised his head one last time, and the smell of forest and wet earth intensified. And then, without any sound except that broken silence, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. He didn't run. He just dissolved. and the yard felt emptier than before. I returned to my corner, trembling. Was it real? Was it a dream? I didn't know. But one thing changed. I wasn't alone anymore. I had witnessed the pain of another being, and that, in some way, made me feel less selfish about my own pain. I understood that even in loneliness, we can connect through shared grief, and that connection was my new thread of hope. After the shadow left, the silence that remained was different. It was a silence with history, a silence I respected. I didn't sleep much. The moon watched me, and I felt my mental letter to her was almost complete. I had already accepted that the sun would rise, and I would still be in Kennel 7. After all, the pain of accepting reality is always less than the pain of clinging to false hope. I was ready for another day of waiting. But the dawn arrived differently. The first sign wasn't the light. It was the smell. First, the smell of strong coffee mixed with the scent of soap and a hint of lavender. Human smells, common, but carrying a certain urgency. Then, the noise. Hurried footsteps, low voices, the jingle of keys. It was early. Too early for the normal visiting hours. I got up. I didn't wag my tail. I didn't show the euphoria of a puppy. I just watched. I knew my chance had passed the day before. I was trying to be strong, Goldie, the dog philosopher who accepts her destiny, and then the hallway filled with people. Not the usual noisy crowd. It was just 3 of them, a dark-haired woman, a quiet man, and a caretaker. And they stopped. They stopped in front of my kennel. Kennel 7. I huddled a little. Please don't look at me. Please don't give me hope again. But the woman took a step forward and knelt down, not caring about the cold floor. And she looked at me, not with pity, not with that casual curiosity. She looked at me with a depth that made me hold my breath. It was a look that seemed to recognize not just my appearance, but my entire story. I, who always watched the shoes, couldn't help but notice hers. They were walking shoes, a little worn with a touch of dry mud as if they had been used on long trails recently, and next to her, the man's shoes, equally lived in. But what caught my attention most wasn't the shoes. It was their scent. Not their smell, but the smell that was missing. They carried a subtle scent which hovered around them like an invisible cloud of sadness. It was a smell of absence. It was as if the scent of a dog who was no longer there had clung to their clothes, their shoes, their hearts. Fresh grief. I looked at them, and in that second, the timeline of my life, which I thought was already written, began to be torn up and remade. If you are feeling this emotion, this delightful uncertainty that comes before a big change, don't let Goldie's story disappear in Kennel 7. Share this video, give it your golden like, and tell me in the comments, what is your biggest fear of being abandoned? That way, I'll know there are more attentive hearts out there. The woman slowly reached out her hand toward the bars. I didn't move. She waited. Time stopped for both of us. And when the tip of her fingers brushed my snout, I felt something I never imagined feeling again. Not just affection, but an urgent desire to be healed. And my golden heart, which was rusting, gave a small, hesitant beat. Her touch, that brush of fingers on my head, it wasn't the gesture of someone who just wanted to adopt a pet. It was the gesture of someone who needed a link, of someone who was looking for a lost piece of themselves. I looked into the woman's eyes, and in them, I saw the same shadow of pain that I had seen in the yard projected onto the moon, hours earlier. It was an unmistakable, aching emptiness, the kind of hollow space that a loyal heart leaves behind when it ceases to beat. I recognized it immediately, because it mirrored the hollow space inside me. It was the pain of a tether broken, a bond dissolved not by choice, but by fate.
The man who had remained silent finally moved. He didn't touch me. He stood just outside my reach, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, a picture of restrained grief. Instead, he pointed to my ear, where the shelter tag with my name and number 7 was attached, the label that defined me as a statistic, an unclaimed item. "Goldie," he said. His voice was deep but incredibly soft, as if he were trying out a precious, fragile word. "Her name is Goldie." The woman closed her eyes for an instant. A silent, shuddering breath escaped her, and in that tiny moment, I understood what was truly happening. That smell of absence, the fresh grief clinging to their walking shoes, the profound depth of her look, it wasn't random. It had a name, a history. And by some rare cosmic reason, that heartbreaking story had traveled through the night to find mine. He continued, speaking to the caretaker, but his focus never left me. His words were a confession, not a request for adoption. "We found her," he said. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "She is exactly like Max." Max. A name. A name that echoed not just off the cold walls of Kennel 7, but in the empty space between the man and the woman. Max. I hadn't known him. I hadn't shared his sunshine days or his evening cuddles. But now I knew. The smell of forest and wet earth that the wind had carried, the large grieving shadow that cried into the night sky. The midnight visitor who stood silently outside my fence was not mourning for himself. He was the ghost of their memory. He was standing vigil, making a final silent farewell to the shelter, the last cold place he had known before leaving them forever. Max was the dog that this family had lost. And that man, that quiet, heartbreakingly loyal man, was Max's human.
I was not a replacement. Never that. To think I could replace a love like Max's would be a foolish vanity. Instead, I was the answer. They weren't looking for a new dog to simply fill a space on the couch or empty a bag of kibble. They were looking for a new mission for the boundless, remaining love that their old heart had stored up. Their grief was a well, and my need was a bucket. And I was a golden heart, weary and scarred by abandonment, that needed a secure place to drop anchor. In that tiny shared space in the shelter, our two broken stories finally aligned in pain. They needed me to channel the love meant for Max, to help them heal the sharp, daily ache of his absence. And I needed them to heal my desperate, paralyzing fear that no one would ever come for me. The universe, in its cruel wisdom, had waited until we were both at our absolute lowest. Them in their devastating loss, me in my final resignation, to bring us together. It was a terrible, beautiful alignment. It was the universe saying, "You must share your wounds to heal them." The woman took a deep, shaky breath, and this time, the scent of lavender and fresh soap was layered with a new smell, relief. She reached out her hand again, slowly, definitively. This time, I didn't hesitate. I reached out and gently licked her fingers. That wasn't just a lick. That was my vow. That was my yes. I promised her my unwavering loyalty, my endless supply of warmth, and my commitment to helping them remember Max with joy, not just sorrow. "Let's go home, Goldie," she whispered. And her voice was finally choked, not with silence, but with the sudden, overwhelming release of tears. I didn't look back. There was no need. I felt the familiar click of the collar being secured, but this time, the weight around my neck wasn't a burden. It was a tether of trust. I looked straight ahead, past the cold bars, past the miserable concrete, to the shoes that, finally, had stopped for good.
And the world, which hours earlier was an unforgiving canvas of gray and cold, suddenly exploded with the colors of hope and the intoxicating scent of a new beginning. The illusion of permanence was gone, replaced by the reality of a promise. Hope was no longer a desperate plea to the moon, it was a tangible gift. The real lesson of that night moon wasn't about being adopted. It was about finding purpose in pain. I discovered that even when you're at your absolute lowest point, in your moment of most profound solitude, your unfinished story is actively aligning with someone else's unfinished story, someone who needs exactly your scar to heal theirs. Loneliness is not a curse. It is merely the empty space that love is patiently waiting to fill. And sometimes, heartbreakingly, you have to lose everything. You have to hit rock bottom in the darkness of Kennel 7 to finally understand the immense unconditional power of the love you have left to give. I will never forget the silence of those bars or the quiet grief of the midnight visitor. Never give up on searching for your home. Never give up on the promise that your loyalty will be met with a love that lasts. If you felt my golden heart beat stronger with this story, if you believe that every soul deserves a chance at a new start, please leave your loved it in the comments. Tell me your own story of healing. Share this journey with anyone who needs a dose of hope. And subscribe to the channel to follow the timeline of Goldie's life, from my first tentative step inside my forever home to my very last reflection. I promise, the best stories from a golden heart are always the ones we find together.